They're all recording, so I can edit them later.
Oh, good.
But there also is an option to stream directly and record right to the iPad, and that is the one that is live for those purposes.
Okay. All right.
So we were good all along. Welcome back to Eric's Mindset. If you haven't, please hit that like and subscribe. Today, Olaf and I are going to talk about transcendence, inner resilience, and the power of perspective. And this is just a gentle reminder to use your personal and global challenges as opportunities for growth. Now, please enjoy the show.
Now there is that's a powerful anecdote of how we get caught up in shit. We get caught up in stuff. Our brains get all wrapped up. And then after trepidation of 2-3 hours over X, Y, or Z, we come to realize it worked all along. How often does that happen in our lives anyway?
Yeah. When you were on your way here, I was making a smoothie and I turned on the blender, and then the cover's off. And usually I turn the blender way down and I turn it on and it's fine. But it was up a little bit too high and I turned it on, and I was remembering while I was cleaning up, I was remembering a time where I would have been questioning why the universe hates me to some extent. Why didn't I remind myself, there would be some level of understanding the personal responsibility, but I would be thinking, well, why didn't I remind myself my own soul hates me, or my own heart hates me, and it wouldn't be exactly like that, but it'd be something along those lines. And I was just, as I was cleaning it up, originally when I would have those types of reactions over whatever it is, there might be this outward reaction.
Sure.
Right? About how terrible this is. And then you sort of catch on that, wait a minute, I don't need to have that outward reaction about this doesn't make anything any better.
Right.
It's really not so bad.
So you coach yourself.
But you coach yourself to not have the outward behavior, but then there's still this bowling inside that's happening about exactly that. Why does God hate me? Why does this happen to me in my life? And I know it's my fault, but what? But then slowly over time, you come to the point along the path where it's like cleaning up the protein drink isn't only not a bad thing, it can be kind of fun. Because it's like, oh, there's a little spinach over here, a little almond milk over here, a little powder up here. There's like this little adventure cleaning up your mess.
Yeah, and you are expressing one of, you might say, 8 fundamental truths, or one of the 8 pillars of joy, of living with joy. And that is perspective making. We think we're stuck to our original perspective. Why does the universe hate me, damn it? And I have to clean it up, damn it. What the hell, And you can stay in that perspective and kind of make the next hour miserable. Or it was a beautiful shift on your part. Perspective changing and say, hey, wait a minute. Cleaning is good. Maybe the humbling of it is good. Learning from the mistake of not being careful about the lid is good. A lot of good here. In psychology, we also call it reframing. Glass half empty, how about looking at it as half full? That old story.
Right.
But, and that shows your soul and mind resilience. Perspective resilience is so crucial to well-being and to, being a more happy, functioning, effective functioning human being.
Mm-hmm.
Really. But it's easier said than done because, we have a kind of a emotional momentum. Once we have a feeling, so easy to just stay with that feeling and then add to it with thoughts and make ourselves more miserable. Not only does the universe hate me, but I had a date last night and she couldn't stand me and we were just fooling each other and just talking nice and it didn't, and we neither of us felt comfortable. What the hell?
Mm,
And we can just add on stuff that substantiates the perspective we have.
sure.
And we can be right, but we can be miserable.
Sure. Absolutely. Along these lines, and I'm going to get into raising your consciousness, so higher levels of consciousness. But along these same lines, there's a buddy of mine, old buddy of mine, the other day. He was just in a bad state. He uh, lost his phone, lost his truck. About to get kicked out of his apartment. Doesn't have a job right now, and and I was out helping him out. Now he's in a bad state. So he was drinking and he was saying something to the I I don't hold any of this against him. He's in a bad frame of mind, but he said something that woke me up to myself. While I was there helping him out, he said, "Nobody helps me out. Nobody comes to help me out." And this was a reoccurrent theme. Now, again, he knows better. It was a state of mind. But what I got from that is, I've heard plenty of people be in this frame of mind before. There's just a lack of gratitude, and why doesn't anybody help me? And everybody else did it to me.
Perspective can blind you to reality.
But what it helped me, it helped reflect me back to me, is that even though, this has been 20, 30 years of work in this realm of expanding my own consciousness, over 30 years of work in this realm of expanding my own consciousness, that's been mostly, I've been fortunate to be spurred on by addiction issues. I could talk about that, but I've been pushed forward in certain ways to expand, as opposed to staying stagnant. But there's still be times when, especially in the morning, it's like I wake up back in this world and sort of lament my existence. And and even though I know better, I've done lots of work in this realm, it's not like I'm sitting dormant and ignorant and unaware of myself. But there would be this, just, why does everything suck, type of a thought process that had built up over time. And I saw, and what struck me by watching my friend was that that's exactly what I'm doing with existence in the morning. Hey, this is me being completely ungrateful while everything is being essentially provided from a certain perspective. The entirety of the universe is provided for you, and you sit there and talk about how you have nothing, or how you everything is so terrible.
Yeah, it's that you use an interesting phrase, meeting existence. One of the gifts of sleep is the interruption, at least of our operant self-aware consciousness. We know the brain is doing a lot of important work during our sleep. In fact, if we don't sleep, we go totally crazy because sleep allows the brain to sort of sort and sift and throw things in the hopper, the garbage. So, and sometimes our psyche picks up on images, weird images, and we remember some things here and there. But our brain, so what I find one of the graces and beautiful things about sleep and wake up is I meet existence in a fresh way. My brain is ready to receive existence in more or less a fresh way, an open way. It doesn't mean that there aren't issues that carry forward. If I got fired yesterday, I'm still fired today. So, I'm not being Pollyanna, but meeting existence, most of us are sort of unconscious about how we meet reality. And I wanna and then you admit to you had kind of a bah humbug, Scroogey, ungrateful response to waking up. And it kind of reminds me of faith research done by a guy named James Fowler and others. And he writes about it. And he says, faith, that's a heavy word, but faith, he says, is not a belief system like a cognitive system that you kind of worked out. I believe this, I believe that. Faith is basically how you lean into life. Or to put it this way, what are the terms? What are the foundational attitudes you have toward meeting existence? And I'll never forget this moment. I might have shared with you this before, so I might be repeating myself. For the first time, and now I've driven maybe hundreds of times down that same trail, but the first time I biked down the Pine Creek Trail near Rochester Hills, Michigan, it was just a beautiful trail, former railroad, a lot of trees on both sides and no businesses, just an occasional house. I mean, really, biking in nature. But occasionally there would be a little bit of a private property. And I come by this little free area that has a picket fence, a kind of a light gray picket fence. And in big letters were these words, I love you, life. On one line, I love you, and underneath, life. I literally stopped, put on my brakes. No, I did. I got off the bike, I walked, and I stood in front of that. It was almost like God talking to me, like a religious moment. But it was a profound, it touched me deeply. I mean, how weird on the fence. I love you, life, and how do you meet existence? How do you meet love? That's such a foundational question that you woke up into.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's, I don't know. I think it's something that we struggle with is getting to that point. Like we know better. Yeah. Like I mentioned it in this way previously is that it's like, okay, we might know how to work out, but that doesn't all of a sudden put us in a state of being fit, physically fit. Is we, um, and so, we go through these stages, including self-judgment. So for years, really, in the mornings, and I must admit that the mornings have been the most difficult for me. And I actually, I like to make up stories for these things to understand them. And I like to think that I'm traveling to the astral realms. My awareness is quite simply somewhere. Sure. It's exploring something in some dimension.
Okay.
Awareness itself is somewhere. And so when I come back here, I'm just less than happy that I'm back in this sort of density. And because I have not learned to yet, and I hope I'm not going too fast for the, I have not yet learned to transmute the energy, sort of lift the energy. And how I see it is, something that you told me about you said we are energy transformers. How did you say that?
Yeah, we are energy connectors, translators, and transformers,
Mm.
and yeah.
So now the way I took that was that now I'm going to mix a bunch of things together. When we go into the density of the ego self, which would be in direct opposition to the lightness and the freeness of simply what you might call the I am presence or the awareness itself. sort of like when you are in a deep meditation or a hallucinogenic state. You might have encountered this is something people may have encountered this where, or in love really, or on a long marathon run, or in many different states where it just everything falls away and you are simply in a state of divinity, really.
Or lightness of beings, and people that kind of a both kind of a unitive consciousness and a lightness of being, like I could float.
I heard it said this way is actually I didn't know this. This is even a whole other conversation, but from a guy that was an attorney who was attached to the Jesuits. Oh, he worked for the Jesuits. He said not as a representative for them, but as a counsel, as an advisor for them.
Oh, okay.
Um, in the Carter era. Yeah.
Okay.
And so he's been involved in those type of things, and now I wrote a whole bunch of notes from him, but not his name. Maybe I'll come up with it. Um,
The lightness, the I am presence, and you rightly said, examples of human experiences that kind of gets into what you're talking about. Experiences like falling in love, or hallucination, maybe taking some mushrooms, carefully handled, or that, other kinds of such experiences. Yeah.
that's right. Thank you. The way he put it was the conditioning of the self. So he called it undifferentiated consciousness, and he called the sum total of undifferentiated consciousness is what people term God, although the term God is a heresy in and of itself because God is not a noun, God is a verb.
Verb, again, yes, sir. I'd say, I think God is God. Some people might be listening now like, who?
Yeah, so God, to nounify God is considered a heresy in some traditions because God is not.
A form of idolatry.
Yeah, God is not an old man on a crown somewhere.
God is mine. I hold God, and if you don't believe what I do about God, I'll use my God understanding as a cudgel to beat you down.
Right.
That's what happens with God as a noun. But if God is a verb, I cannot capture that. I have to sort of, whoa, wait a minute, be impacted, maybe relationally, and maybe receive that as a whole different dimension of reality. And by the way, to folks out there, this is very biblical from my perspective to say God is a verb. The word Yahweh means it's a verb, it's not a noun. Exodus 3:14, one of the historical books in the Bible, when Moses meets the eternal, in a weird event by the burning bush, kind of a mystical experience. He was taking care of some animals in the foothills on Mount Zion, and suddenly he sees this bush, but not being consumed by the flames. And so it's kind of, and he begins to sense a messaging from the eternal, from the sacred. And Moses gets the message from the sacred. I am talking to you because I'm choosing you to go back to Egypt and free the enslaved people who are your ancestors. No, I'm not. I killed somebody back there. That's why I'm by the hills here. I ain't going back. I'll let you. Yes, you are. Well, if I were to go back, see, what's your name? What is your noun? How am I to understand you in my human terms? Yahweh. Huh? I'm being what I'm being. I'm doing what I'm doing. What sense do I make of that? If you don't have a name, because he was in a polytheistic culture with religions of all kinds and different kinds. Egypt was good in practicing polytheism, yet had kind of a word for the singular God above it all, Ra, represented by the sun. But anyway, and then Moses said, "Well, if you're not a noun, how can I talk about you? How am I to understand you?" And the extraordinary answer in this messaging mysterious moment is, look at what I've done and look at the relationships that I've influenced. and I even look at people like you. We've known each other for 10 plus years. And you represent a kind of transformation in consciousness that can happen because a higher power is a verb, not a noun. The energy of higher power works through events and relationships. And we are called to be part of that, join Godding, if you will, join the journeying of standing in for the sacred in this plane and place.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that. Good. Well, I definitely feel like I've made a transformation over time.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Which is great.
I grow through our conversations now and then over the 10 years. It's not like I'm some super guru. I don't know. No, I'm learning and I'm experiencing, the verbness of my higher power. I'm a recovering alcoholic. I'm grateful that it's been 34 years, though I know it's one day at a time. I'm grateful for today. And I'm grateful that I have the sanity today to say, I am not getting hooked on something that I miss once in a while. I miss that cabaret. I miss the warmth. Oh, boy, do I miss the after dinner coffee with B&B. Oh, man, I miss the buzz.
So that's actually a perfect opportunity to take to task something that I think is a fundamental flaw in the way we look at the struggles that we have. And it causes us to not be able to take advantage, not only not be able to take advantage of them, but to turn them into dysfunction. Because we see it, so let's take addiction, for instance. We see, I don't know. I would say culturally, we see the addictive behavior. We recognize the fact that it's a struggle that somebody has within, and especially with regard to alcohol addiction, we recognize it as a disease. Hopefully, in the way that it's like you lose control. You don't have the power to deal with it or stop yourself, really. However, I think that even though that is shifting, we still fundamentally look at difficulties in um difficulties that somebody may have with regard to their behavior or their mental states or their emotional states as as sort of um a that there's something, that they're broken, that there's something wrong with them, that they came out of the factory defective,
Right.
rather than this is sort of their hero's journey. These are the trials that have been put in front of them, and they've been given all the tools in order to overcome these trials in order to become the potential person that they are meant to be. And so that then this plays right into what I'm talking about transmuting energy. As though, so I think our normal state is like, you can't, it doesn't matter. Um I want to say, I don't know if this, there's no church or state in existence that can keep us from being who we are, no matter how much they want to keep the people in line. And I don't know why I want to put it that way. It's another conversation.
Yeah, for sure.
But so I see this place where I have spent significant time over the years. At first, this state of epiphanal, an epiphany state, an epiphanal state.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, wait a minute. You're like, I remember me. And you're like, it's seemingly within the answers of the universe are within your grasp. And it seems as if, the angels are at your shoulders, and that you just, it just, the density of things falls away. The reason I brought up the lawyer with the Jesuits, he referred to it as the universe beyond the mass, beyond mass and energy. This is how he this is how he thought of beyond mass and energy is a field, an infinite field of undifferentiated consciousness. This is what he said. He came into the Jesuit order recognizing, and he talked to them about it, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we know that," and they were pleased that he was aware of it. Now, this is the Catholic Church, which was interesting to me that they have this sort of a field of study about looking well beyond what the average.
And that's part and parcel of Jesuits that I've known and a privilege to know over the years. They're very smart people, but they get dedicated to understanding life, understanding the earth, and serving the well-being of it. And they go beyond, you might say, the guardrails of doctrine, of dogma. And so as Jesuits can be very threatening to the prevailing, you might say, religious administration in the Vatican. I'm not saying that they don't have respect for the Jesuits, but sometimes there's tensions between traditional understanding of things and the Jesuit mind, like yours, to explore, to be way out there. And when you're speaking about differentiated field of consciousness, it's kind of a way of speaking about, to use an old term, quote, heaven, unquote. Earth is dense, like you say. It has consciousness, substantive consciousness. But beyond, into the realm of infinity, you can rightly say there is the undifferentiated fields of consciousness. I mean, there's a logic, to me at least, that it makes sense. And to this bright lawyer who works with Jesuits, he gets that, yeah,
Right.
and speaks it.
Yeah. Okay. So just to further put texture to this, how I'm explaining this is that he what I call falling into the density, okay, or falling into the lower realms of density is what he calls the conditioning of this. He calls it consciousness. There's undifferentiated consciousness, and there's the conditioning. And he talks about how you have the conditioning of the astrological effects of the tractor pulls of the heavenly bodies. You have the cultural things. You have the environmental everything. You have your genetic what's going on with you genetically, your heritage, your gender, your physical body, your DNA, your all of these different things. So these are the conditionings of this consciousness. And then what the original idea of religion was, and I can't remember what he did the sort of an etymology of the word religion, is the study of transcending these conditionings of consciousness. And and the Jesuits just as far as I understand it, the Jesuits are sort of the professionals for the Catholic Church. And you have to have like a PhD, at least one, to be in the Jesuits, from what I understand or what I've heard. That it's like the doctors and the lawyers and the ones who do the sort of organizing, the education, and different things of that nature.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
They are smart people. I don't know if it's a requirement as a PhD or an equivalent or what, but yeah. And I like this understanding of religion as a study of transcending the various conditionings. And what we tend to do is internalize these conditionings, and then you use the word density. It's like we put ourselves into state of molasses. We kind of molasses ourselves. you know, I'm free to gesture like this. As a free dancing being. Crazy. Childlike octogenarian. But what people do, they begin to condition themselves and put themselves in molasses of truth, and I daren't do this because that's not proper. Now, you used a very important word, epiphanal, or the epiphany, a state of epiphany, of surprising awareness. And it's interesting that Richard Rohr, who is one of my lead thinkers, kind of talks about the universal Christ. He's, very, holistic thinker, spiritual thinker, Richard Rohr. And he talks about 7 distinct ways of knowing. And one of the natural states of human knowing is the epiphanal knowing, epiphanies, and it's interesting when you talk to ordinary people, um, many can answer the question, was there ever a point or 2 or 3 in your life where you were suddenly surprised by an insight, kind of like surprised by an awareness that came to you, like an aha that maybe had quite an impact on how you were living your life, how you understood yourself, maybe how you can reframe a relationship and be better with it, or like a sense of calling, and it reminds me of an epiphanal moment in my life. I was starting my internship, in chaplaincy, the application of you might say, the profession of psychology and putting it into the framework of caring for medical patients. Okay. So I was starting my internship, 15 months, for 3 months in one hospital, then a whole year, like a medical intern, and learning through practice and working with patients, working on the psychic dimension, the spiritual dimension, their faith dimension. How are they leaning into the sickness? With trust and optimism, or with despair and guilt and giving up? So, the chaplaincy in medical settings was research showed to be very helpful in helping patients to heal better, to respond better to medicines, respond quicker from surgeries and the like. So, but to get back to the epiphanal moment, early I decided to go to the medical library in the hospital in Des Moines, Iowa. The name of the hospital was Lutheran Hospital, just to check out the medical library. And on the wall was a whole raft of magazines, basically professional quarterlies, basically related to medicine. But there was what caught my eye was a magazine called Psychology Today.
Mhm.
Now it's a very popular everyday kind of magazine. Back then, it was a little bit more higher level for, higher, more educated people. It wasn't for professional psychologists only, but, So I find this article written by a PhD, certified minister, psychologist. And he said, and this was like back in 1968, the summer of 1968. He said, what we need now to do is to interrelate insights from theology and from psychology. And he laid that out and argued that. And as I read it, it was sort of like the heavens opened, the angels started singing, and I got tearful in thinking, that's my calling, to bring the element of spiritual truths and psychological truths together. You can call it theology and whatever, but to understand the sacred and to understand the human and how they weave together. And it was epiphanal. And Richard Rohr says epiphanies like that usually are gifts, gifts from the universe. I can't like manufacture, make myself epiphanal. It comes to me. It's kind of like Bert Bacharach when he was asked, how is it that you are able to create these memorable tunes, especially the like little phrases of tunes? What the world needs now is one sweet love. And I'll never forget that line,
Mhm.
you know. And and Bert said in an interview, he said, it's the muse. It's the muse. It just comes to me.
Mhm.
Again, it's a form of epiphanal receiving of the gift of harmonies that then becomes a gift to us through his musical genius. But he was epiphanal in his receptivity to be a conduit of wonderful, warm lines that are memorable. And I believe every human being has the capacity for such epiphanal experiences, those ahas that can help to clarify what's going on and maybe facilitate a person to choose a better path, life path.
Uh, wow. Okay. So what you sort of helped me figure something out there that I hadn't even considered before. Is that when I referred to the epiphanal or epiphanal, I didn't even know that was a word. I just always called it
I mean, I think you might be saying it correctly, piano. I think that's a better way to say it.
okay. I thought I made
You're not correct.
no. It's like, so when I had these epiphanal moments, and so what it meant from me directly, and I think you're saying, and I'm it feels as if you're seeing the same thing, it's just from a different perspective. Is so that how I encountered this is that when I was young, and I think I told you before, what struck me, uh, when you have sort of when you're called in a certain direction, whether it's to be a doctor or a lawyer or a sports star or a mechanic or just to study the nature of existence, whatever it is, you kind of can feel it early on.
That's true.
And so for me, there was always this. I remember distinctly sitting in my toy room and seeing a different side of life than anybody talked about or was represented by the sort of surface level, almost in a scary peanut gallery type of way, like just like this. They're talking about all on the surface level, but nobody goes beneath the surface line. But you can see it
Right.
as a very young person.
Yeah.
And then, to the point where, for me at that time, mostly around me, there was this sort of push against, that was the beginning of the push against religion. And the religion itself, that was the only spirituality that I even had any awareness of, was religion, all this God thing. That's all nonsense for stupid people, you know?
Yeah.
And that's how it was sold to me, it's sort of a generalization.
Sure.
But then I read a book by Carlos Castaneda, and that was the beginning.
Hey, oh my.
That was the beginning for me. It was so my mom used to take us to the library quite, or the library or the bookstore quite a bit. Whenever we had a few bucks to spend, we weren't high on the horse, but we here and there we could buy some books. And I remember one of the things, there's always these things that you want to do as soon as you have the license and the freedom to get around. And one of those things was that when I would go to the bookstore with my mom, I saw the New Age and spirituality section,
Oh, real.
and that seemed like a forbidden section.
Stay away from new age.
Yes.
Stay in the old age.
Yes. So within a week of getting my license, and I had money in my pocket because I, started working doing pools for the family at 13 years old. So I had money in my pocket. And so within a week of getting my license and having a car that my parents provided me with, I was at the bookstore. And I remember, I don't remember the first one. I read quite a few of his books. It was like The Teachings of Don Juan or The Art of Dreaming or something like this. But it was the late 80s, early 90s.
Right.
And that was what set me off on this. And eventually I got to this point. I started getting into this idea of sort of the higher self. The higher self.
Sure.
I didn't know what it was,
Mm-hmm.
but I got onto this idea of the higher self. And sorry, to get to the point is that there came a time, and I don't know if I was high on something or I was just meditating or maybe I was just driving or walking or exercising or something, I came into what I call this epiphanal moment, where I all of a sudden remembered myself, is the way I would describe it. I remembered my eternal self. And I go, oh, wow. And you kind of go, oh, now I remember me in the density, in the game. I remember myself. And I go, oh, okay, well, this is great. I solved everything. And then boom, you forget it. You forget it ever happened. It's like the experience never happened. And then
A fleeting moment,
a fleeting moment.
like a soap bubble. Whoop.
Then 10 years later, it happens again. And then you start to remember that it happened, but because it disappears as instantly as it came on, you start to you'll start to remember over time that it happened, but then you're like, well, wait a minute, was I just dreaming?
Right. Because elusive. Right.
What, and then the frequency sort of picks up, or the frequency has picked up over time, so that eventually you're like, no, the times when you are in doubt of the experience are outweighed by you being like, wait a minute, I know this is the truth. I don't know why I have to fall back into this density that I call it, this dense round. But I know now that that's the truth of my existence, because that's the clarity to where I come to points where, especially with that, when I'm within nature, when I'm, living or existing, or mostly within nature, and I'm not too concerned with the earthly things. It's just follow the exercise and the movement of the body, and be out in nature, and do the things of life without worrying about the things that we have put on ourselves culturally.
Right.
No matter what culture we live in, we still have to prepare food and clean ourselves, and take care of certain things, including our body, and be observant of nature. But what I'm saying is that I spend more time in this. You spend more time in this awareness of self. Now,
That's right. Yeah. And nature can have that influence because all of the um, social symbols and you might say environmental pressure points are gone. Instead, there are beautiful leaves and trees and a path and there's air and cloud or whatever. Excuse me for a second. Huh.
lobster.
Thank you. And so this the sense of awe and wonder are very much tied to natural experiences in nature. Many people, say, I don't experience whatever they mean by the term God in buildings. I don't experience the presence of God in religious actions, but I do have a sense of the sacred when I'm in nature and the presence of transcendence when I'm just in the fields and just kind of walking and letting my mind just soak it in and not worry about things or try to define things, but just be in the flow of kind of a receptive consciousness that tends toward just, feel the properties of nature, the naturalistic energies, breath, aromas, even impact of walking up a hill and what that does for the psyche for a while, walking into a valley, what that does to the psyche, very different from walking up on the hill. And yet they are magical in their own way. I relate to that. I want to say something about this recovering in the epiphanal experience of the eternal self. I call it the mirrored I am. of the sacred I am. Your verb, your inner verb, not your inner substantive Eric self, and you're differentiating between the conditioned Eric that carries influences from parentage and friends and events and memories, etc., etc. You know, but what you experienced and what higher consciousness and the core of religious experiences tap into is to have this sense of the correspondence of an internal I am that that speaks about a sense of being eternal, not just internal, like the core of my soul, but internal and eternal. And it doesn't mean I'm God, but as the language of the very first chapter of the books of the Bible, Genesis says, the human being, men and women equally, are made in the image of the Creator. And if the Creator is verb, essentially, might I, mirror-like, also be verb? And if that is the case, as the sacred is then known through events and relationships, we as human beings, we know ourselves through events and relationships. There is nothing to kind of hide and defend and to be ashamed about. Good. We have an internal sacred as we mirror the sacred Creator.
Which actually, I mean, thank you for kind of bringing me back to I got some caught up setting context that I never got to. What it reminded me of is that knowing yourself, what does that even mean to know the eternal self? Is that you understand it through, oh shoot, the word escaped me, but for me, for the gentleman you're talking about, that Love Sweet Love, he knows it through song. He knows it through something,
Oh,
through a relationship to it, and the relationship is the song that he received. For me, the relationship that I'm looking for is very clear. Is having the perspective of the self beyond the conditioning. Right. Beyond the conditioning of Eric, I want to understand what's back there. And it's something that you have a sense of, or you're developing for a long time, but you don't talk to the people around you about so much because I don't know, it seems like either you're crazy or you're bragging or they don't care, but now I recognize through just the power of the internet that there's lots of people that have a sense of this.
of course. Of course.
Enough to where they're searching for others perspectives and different things like that.
Mhm. Yeah, and there are many angles and dimensions to this, and you know, but one of the things that makes us think that we're kind of singularly crazy with this kind of consciousness that we are talking about, you know, it can seem kind of odd in a hyper extrovert society. We are a hyper extrovert culture. And hence we get into materialism and hedonism. Happiness is a function of having a lot of stuff and be free with a lot of time to do what's fun. That's not necessarily bad. But if overdone, overplayed, at the expense of the interior development, if you were a French citizen, my dear friend, you might well be taken up by a French philosophy school and say, well, we're paying you to think. We're paying you to share your insights. Because France honors the interior, the philosophical. They're not about religious stuff, but France is highly religious at the same time, can be Protestant, big, especially Catholic. So there's a cultural matrix, a cultural specificity, where a culture like France facilitates interior investigation. Here, you might start talking like this at Starbucks. If people might get up and leave. But in France, people might pull up a chair and sit around and say, okay, Eric, tell me more. Sure. You know? I'm not kidding.
Yeah.
It's a kind of stereotype, portrait, I guess.
All right.
Over simple for sure,
Right.
but
Yeah, I will, and I think it's spreading outside of even places like France at this point. Okay, we're sort of opening up to this sort of a thing, and as I talk to even my friends about these types of awarenesses and exploring these things as opposed to talking about, oh, how about them lions is nice, but or talking about things in the physical realm and your accomplishments or your sure things that you own, there can be some joy to that, but also it seems like there is, the way I perceive it is that the density is different. The way I perceive it is the vibration is different. It is that I couldn't dream of bringing something like that up in the 90s with my friends. They wouldn't know what the heck I was talking about.
yeah.
And I think there still is very much a mainstay of, um, it's not only the God of the gaps, but the God of like you go find God when you're in such a bad place that you failed. Then you have nothing left but to go hopefully give your faith over to something that's going to save you because you can't save yourself. Yeah. And so, but now again, which is an idea that I think has to change from, yes, there's a Jim Carrey movie. I think his name's Jim Carrey. He's
Okay.
yeah, he's a real funny guy. Yeah, Jim Carrey.
Yeah.
I just lost his last name for a second, but he's trapped in this he grew up as a baby in this bubble world
Oh,
where he's on camera all the time,
yeah.
and everybody knows it but him.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually he sort of breaks out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's all sorts of stories where people sort of recognize that the world or the bubble that they live in, there's much more outside of the aquarium. It's like the fish inside of an aquarium. This is like, oh, this isn't the all and the entirety of the world. And sometimes it takes that those difficulties that you were sort of meant to go through, or that I'm nobody's victim. I'm no disease's victim. I'm nobody else's victim. As far as I perceive it, I set this up. I set the stage up.
Mm. Mm.
Uh, from my perspective, it's that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now,
That's nuanced.
it is,
You did, but it's also more than what you did.
but the idea um, is that it may have taken a kick to get you to look at things differently. But then
Mm-hmm.
for me, anyways, it's not looking for somebody to save me. You realize at a certain point, you're looking outside of yourself for a savior is not the way to go, as far as I'm concerned. I know that that's another nuanced thing.
Yeah. Some people get to the point of desperation where all of their, you might call the conditioning scaffolding of their lives have all fallen apart. It's like a house blowing up, and all you have is pieces of your life, and you sit there in the dust, and all of your conditioned scaffolds that gave you meaning and substance and location and orientation are gone. So it's not necessarily call out a bad thing, out of core soul need, soul terror, soul wanting to say, and Bill W. went through this. One of the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous. He talks about abject despair. He embarrassed himself going to a meeting that his good friend Abby invited him in a church basement. Bill W. was so drunk and so on that he left there, and he was in such abject despair, went back to his seedy hotel room. He literally fell on his knees and in desperation, total embarrassment, total shame. kind of shouted, "If there is a God, please help me. Whoever you are, whatever you be," to paraphrase, "help me, help me." The soul cry. People call it the soul cry.
Mm.
And he said and wrote about it that suddenly there was like a breeze, but not a breeze of a window open, but the breeze of sacredness, the sacred spirit. And then there was like a warmth and kind of an illumination and a warmth along with the sense of breath, And he said to himself in kind of a laugh, he said, "So this is the God of the preachers." He revealed this experience at an AA National Convention in Akron, Ohio in 1955, I think it was. Some 20 years since, in the mid-30s, he started with Surgeon Bob, this movement, Alcoholics Anonymous, So I'm not saying the soul cry is the only way that people experience metamorphosis. You want to talk about epiphanic, epiphanal. That was such an epiphanal moment. But that is not enough in itself. Bill then had to make sense of his experience and talk to people about it. And it consecrated into the whole genius of taking some of the principles of those meetings in church basements. They had some of the steps of the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous kind of working in their group meetings, trying to help each other, but it wasn't so clear and laid out. It took Bill and Bob under inspiration. And again, kind of like Burt Bacharach, it's almost like the muse, imagination, inspiration. It's like a gift from beyond to help addicted, stuck, alcoholic, drug addicted, etc., shopaholics, sexaholics, stuffaholics, out of those entrapments. You want to talk about density?
Mm.
What's more dense than letting your life be ruled by addictive connections,
Right.
And the 12 steps helps to transcend.
Sure. Yeah. There. Now, okay, in my big roundabout way, essentially what I was trying to get around to was the idea of theology itself, no matter how you get there, is a science. It's a science of the subtlety, of the most subtle. It's a study of the most subtle sciences, really.
Okay.
I
like that.
It's a science of subtlety.
Ah.
Yeah, and so. When I say there isn't a savior outside of yourself, I'm sure there's a lot of Christians that would give me an argument for that one. But what I'm saying is I have to admit it irritated me as you gave the thing about Bill W. because I'm quick to catch myself anymore, but it's still because you come to the point where you don't become subsumed by an irritation. You go, where's that from?
Down right. And I caught that nuance. Yeah. I looked at your face as I was talking. I thought,
Yeah. So what is going through my head is sort of there was a disappointment that apparently was still there because I've done that. I've been in that place. I've been in the deepest, darkest hole where death is at your doorstep and you don't know if you're going to survive, and you can't, the despair is so deep, and you're calling out to God and there's no answer. And now at the time, I'm thinking about Bill W. and I'm thinking about Neil Donald Walsh and his book Conversations with God. That's how he starts the book out.
He's a gem.
And there's a couple like that, and I'm like, well, why are you not coming for me? I've felt this presence before, and over time, there is a recognition that wasn't the journey for me. The journey was understanding it from a different perspective.
Right.
The journey was, and now when I say working, I don't have to fight till I was almost said I'll fight till the day I die to tell you that there's no savior outside of you, and I believe that with all my heart because I just have a different perspective. But the point is I wouldn't fight for it because you just don't fight for it. So I don't have the words for what I was trying to say there. It's just you have a knowing inside. It's like,
Right. You have the knowing and you can affirm it to yourself, but it doesn't lead to disaffirming an opposite view.
no, absolutely not. So, but the point was that now when I say outside of yourself, all of a sudden you have to define what self is. What is the self? And we are made in the image of God. We go back to that statements like that, which there are enough of them. That what does that mean? And to me, that means, and I'm showing just a fractal geometric pattern, which I can show on the camera later, which is fractals of the undifferentiated consciousness of all consciousness, which is then in fractal patterns differentiated. And so what the point is that the conditioning is what I needed to drop. I needed to not drop it, but I needed to be able to transcend it and see past it. I needed to be able to see past it enough to know that even if I'm in this character right now, I'm not the character, and I can see past it. Even though I'm washing dishes right now, I'm not a dishwasher for my eternity. I'm not, whatever I'm doing right now, wherever I am, and whatever I'm going through. This is there's this too shall pass type of an idea. There's this. It's amazing how simple it becomes in your mind, but then trying to get it out it can become so difficult because our language doesn't work in that same way.
Right.
What a surprise! Our language doesn't work how I think. So,
Well, what you're speaking to in my talking about spirituality here and there with people, you're speaking to a metaphor that I developed to try to capture some of these distinctions that you are articulating. And it might be good to show people a picture of this, but I think people can, for the moment, use imagination, as can we in the moment, to kind of paint a picture in your mind. Imagine a bicycle wheel, okay? Round, and the bicycle wheel is our totality, okay? But, just the wheel itself, just the rim itself is not going to cut it. So you have spokes, okay? And three fundamental spokes from the hub center of the wheel. The wheel has to have a mechanism that brings the spokes to a center so that when the wheel rolls, it rolls smoothly, okay? Each of the three spokes, one represents relationship to oneself, the other relationship to others, and relationship to one's higher power. Their understanding of transcendence, their feeling, of higher consciousness or whatever it may be. But what's really crucial in that diagram, this, kind of, metaphorical illustration, when you look at, okay, what's the components that makes the wheel roll? You have a casing, okay, with little balls that allows the casing to spin. And to me, that is a metaphor for the ego consciousness. Our ego consciousness is part and parcel of our relationship to ourselves, our relationship to others, and our relationship to higher power of our understanding. It's kind of that casing is there, and those three spokes must be attached to that. So ego consciousness is not a bad thing. Ego consciousness is necessary for us to negotiate rolling through life, the wheel of life. But the casing is not the final point. The casing spins around something, but that something is not part of the bicycle wheel itself. There is the insertion of some kind of rod, correct? From the frame of the bike. The rod from the frame of the bike makes it possible then for the casing, for that rod to come into the very core of the bicycle wheel. Transcendence is like there is a transcendent rod that is part of what is in that empty part inside the casing. That empty part is the I am. See, the casing, the noun, is about categories, defining. Even today, it's raining out, I better wear a raincoat. Thank God for that ego consciousness, But to use that consciousness to define the ultimate, no. There we go into the transcendent capacity. And so the metaphor, it might be overdone, is sort of like, gets back to the mirroring. The I am is a transcendent aspect of me, but the I am lives in and through the body, the mind, the spirit. And so when I intersect kind of a triangle onto the points where the spokes touch the wheel, you have in relationship to myself, it's mind, relationship to others, my body, and of course mind also, and relationship to higher power, my spirit, mind, and body come together and substantiate it through. And what do I mean by relationship to myself? There I go into social psychology. George Herbert Mead's model, in particular, symbolic interactionism, which simply means I am a composite of personas. You might say, well, that's part of your conditioning. These personas are part of your conditioning. Yes. Right now, I'm being what here? A co-seeker, co-searchers of deeper truths, persona with you and you with me. You're not my lover. That's a different persona of me. You're not my brother. That's a different persona of me. You're not my father. You get it. If you were my father, there would be different dynamics happening here. If you were my brother, per se, same share and same blood, they would be different, So we are a composite of many personas. The model that comes for me from TV, do you remember Mork and Mindy?
Oh, yeah.
The genius, cut, love that. And but what was one of the key things that Mork would do? When Mork was kind of faced with a new way of trying to understand earthlings, and he was kind of confused. Robin Williams was genius. He would say, all right, we got to get together here. We got to get together. And he would run off to a corner in the living room. Come on now, we got to get together here. Get our heads together. And you're looking at Mork, he's alone. But it's a demonstration that we are composites. We are composites of all of our personas. They are part and parcel of us, but they do not define the transcendent essence of us, the I am. They're kind of part of the totality of my life. But the I am is always more than that. But how do I understand the I am? Through transcendence consciousness, and Carlos Castaneda, in his books, he mentioned him. I can't quote you chapter and verse of which book, but an image strikes me from Carlos. He talked about his internal spiritual experience as kind of like opening up through consciousness, a portal. to transcendence. And that portal kind of was what represented by like a ball, like a light, kind of over his right shoulder and a little bit in back of over his head. And it's like illumination, insight coming from beyond, from transcendence. And then he would have a unitive experience where that transcendence soaks his being. Well, Hinduism, with its chakra psychology, understands the process of internalizing the energy of transcendence through the 7 node points of chakras, but that's a whole nother discussion. So what my eclectic mind does is I bring together so many different things like you do, Carlos and Bert Bacharach, and to try to understand this magical aspect of being human, transcendently human as well as cognitively human and biologically embodiedly human in a neat package, and too many people sell that whole package short.
Sure.
They, like you have said this whole time, in one way or another, they get caught in a particular kind of conditioning. It's so dense, like molasses, and they stay there.
Sure.
And it's sad because they could be so much more and continue to become much more than what they think they are.
Right. It's sad, and at the same time, again, I think we shift that perspective and say, well, this is their, this is their trials. This is what they have to go through in order to become the great potential of who they are. Because I don't think, I come from the perspective of everyone is source. That it's not a first. I'm not the first person to have that perspective. Is that all is God, so to speak. Let's put it simply. And God sort of again, there's that blasphemous word, but the heretical word that
Well, we can use it. It has a narrative value, the word God. And might I say to people who are biblically illiterate, in case they wonder about this I am stuff, like that's so unbiblical, it's so new agey or whatever. Look at verse 4, Psalm 68. There is a line. If I'm not mistaken about my numbers, I am is the sacred name.
well, I mean,
I am.
I am is what?
I am is the sacred name. And it's a verb.
Well, let's we respect yeah, okay. So let's do it this way, is that because you don't have to believe anything or be in any sort of new agey way of thinking.
Right.
Because I certainly am not pie in the sky. Ooh, no. When I think of new agey, I think of like idealistic sort of the type of thinking I had in early 20s. This sort of idealistic spirituality. Whereas the I am is simply this, is very what do you call it? Observational. It's an observational effect. So if you're getting back to the fact that, your body changes over the course of your lifetime and your thoughts change, your emotions, every cell in your body changes out every 7 years. Your possessions change, your titles change, even your genetic code changes. But what about you is still the same? And who is the one watching all this go down? And so what I generally come down to too is about the kingdom of heaven, as I call it. And what I think is being referred to originally is that, once this body perishes, I'm looking at what's going to be left. Well, what's going to be left, if there is some survivorship whatsoever, which I think is almost a silly statement, but it's still worth, investigation. What's going to be left is likely akin to what's been here the whole time, and it is the awareness of the changes themselves, and something akin to even in this physical realm. I'm not experiencing the physical realm per se. I'm experiencing a representation of it within my imagination.
That's right.
So if I close my eyes and go into my imagination, it is literally no different than looking out at the world. There is a mind space. There is a stage on which the drama plays out. And there is a witness of that drama.
Yes.
And if I so choose to, I can become subsumed by these patterns of this existence. At the core, we call archetypes. And believe that I am them in whatever amalgamation they might want to play themselves out. Or I can play them out knowing that I am the actor the whole time, but I am simply right now playing a character. But at any rate, what has been persistent through the course of my known existence is there is a witness and there is a stage on which it plays out.
Yeah.
And it has not changed. Those things have been untarnished by age. They aren't hurt by pains and heartaches. They simply witness it play out. And so that is the I am presence.
Yeah. Yeah. You said quite a mindful.
I've been thinking about that one for a while.
What the word witness is very interesting, and it sort of intimates the internal psychic structure of ourselves, which Freud kind of put his finger on early in distinguishing the id from the superego and the ego. But he hypothesized and worked with them as not on the realm of operant consciousness, but level and two lower, subconscious and unconscious. And that the id is the core unconscious driver, the sexual impulse, the id, the anger that wants to just destroy civilization, the id, and then the super ego is, in a sense, our inner witness to our behaviors, to ourselves and to reality and to others. And so the super ego becomes sort of the repository of judgment, the judge, the inner judge. And I wish I remembered his name, a classical psychiatrist. I can never remember his name, that he makes a distinction between the critical superego, the one that says, "What's wrong with you, Eric?" or an Olaf, "What's wrong with you guys? You're not being right. You're not doing right. You could have done better." And so we feel hammered upon. It's almost like the inner witness making a case to the sacred. What a scumbag, he is, that kind of thing. But then there's also and that implies a paternal judgmentalism. And then in this psychiatrist view, in this model, he says there's the other side of the coin, the supported, the warm, comforting superego that says, "Hey, Olaf, yes, you made a mistake and you made a fool of yourself, but that's all right. It's just part of being human. But guess what? It's also a good way to learn." And when you think about it, have you learned some things about yourself out of that mistake? And might that help you in the future, kind of thing? So is that necessary? So we have kind of a paternal judgmental, a kind of, judging witness, and we have the maternal supportive, continue to go kind of witness. So that, and I'm not saying that's what you meant to say in your sub narrative, but that's what comes to kind of my mind, that we are given, and some people might even use the word conscience. That what is conscience? And conscience is a gift of cognitive awareness that helps me to live according to certain values and standards and principles that I have learned are important. And so conscience can be part of the whole witness dynamic, I guess is one would say. Witness to me can be like a corporate term. There are many different angles to this corporation. But we are self looking creatures. We are self witnessing creatures. This is our blessing and this is our bane because that's where we get hooked into negative witnessing. And that's where such despair can come in. I've worked with people who just literally try to commit suicide. They couldn't stand what they were witnessing in themselves, and were self-hating and self-rejecting. This theme of witness that you're talking about is so key in our whole, call it mechanism, or a whole complex process of growing into our better humanity that mirrors the sacred humanity or the humanity in the sacred. But that's another story.
You mentioned, you said there's the witness. There's two witnesses, I believe you said, like a witness of the super ego. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean,
And that becomes twi. That becomes a judgmental part of the superego and the supportive. It's like a coach. An excellent coach in football or basketball knows what players to kick so that they play better and what players to hop so that they play better. A good coach can be both masculine and say, and use a critical approach, or can be feminine to just use those words. I know that we get accused of sexism or whatever,
yeah.
of saying, hey man, you're better than that. In your shots, you're beginning to too much lean on your right foot. You're kind of skewing your shots. You're not jumping off their feet equally strong. So no surprise that the ball is angling away on the rim.
What
Kind of thing.
What was the other one? The witness of the super ego, and then you pointed to something else.
Well, yeah, I can't recover my own language.
That's fair. But yeah, I get that. I'm familiar with that. But what I mean, that's definitely using it with a difference from where I was coming from. I was coming from more like, where is the judgment of the super ego?
Yeah.
So when from the position I'm in right now of being in a human being, being a human, being in the vessel of a human being. So, there is the best I know myself is these what I call the epiphanal moments. Which is where I it's not that I can view myself, but I have the perspective that I remember. It's having this perspective of the easiest way to describe it might be like having almost like a grandfatherly type perspective. Is a matured perspective. Um, that more of an eternal perspective than a right here, right now sort of judgment type perspective. Now, what I wanted to get to, and the guy we were talking about before about that had been working with the Jesuits, he actually said that the Jesuits it's a large part of their study is to understand what raises consciousness.
Okay.
What helps you get to higher levels of consciousness.
Oh no. Okay.
And what brings people into lower levels of consciousness. And what he was specifically referring to or giving examples of was foods, alcohols, consuming your thought patterns with lower chakra stuff like the gut and the sexual organs, and Yeah, sex and food and drugs and rock and roll. Maybe not rock and roll. Rock and roll is good, but you know, gluttony in this way.
Sure.
And then you talked about fasting as maybe the opposite of that. Now, the witness of the superego, this is what I was trying to say previously that I lost the thread on, is that it's a different way of using the word witness, is that, boy, it's so different. It forces me out of my even thought stream. It's got me building new patterns here. The judgment. Okay, so the experience of judgment is that it doesn't have to be some big thing that I'm judging you for whatever. Where I'm judging this person for being too tall, too short, too fat, too old, too young, too whatever. It could simply be I'm walking into the hardware store, right? And I see on the ground a pallet full of logs that are like, they have firewood logs that are sort of all tightly wrapped in a cellophane, and it has this label on it and it says bark free logs, right? And which is fine. The majority, there's 99% of me is just like, okay, that's nice. Oh, but there's this 1%, there's this thought that comes across the screen, like this errant vagabond that just goes, who the hell cares if they're bark free?
Sure.
You know, and
And that is part of our soul.
now,
The recalcitrant judgmental superego part.
yeah, and it's okay. Now, there would have been in the past this whole thing that could have played out from something so simple as that. A whole thing could have played out in my ego about um it could be just like I go into this rage about thinking about stupid laws and stupid things and stupid that, or it could be when I come to the point where I realize, well, maybe that's not the best way to be. I would judge myself for, even though I know better, I'm still having those thoughts.
Sure.
And then there, no, to um, you know, it, at this point in my existence, okay, it doesn't take too long to just go, okay, I see you there. I'm not getting caught up in your stuff, but I can notice that that thought hurts my heart. It maybe it doesn't hurt it, but right now there's enough of a connection that it sort of goes, that's a judgment, and it's pushing me away from that sort of a thing. So it's training the consciousness out of that simple judgment and saying that that is the way I perceive that and interpret that is, at this point in my evolution, is that this is the opposite of you. This doesn't belong in your field. The field meaning the stage on which the things play out within my psyche or my consciousness. This does not belong in your field. That's why it hurts you, and it will hurt you until you become sated or hit rock bottom with it. And then it'll start to fade out. Well, where are you at the point where it's starting to fade out? But it's still going, yeah, we don't need those errant vagabond energies anymore. That takes you away from you.
Right.
That brings you down in consciousness. And then it tests it. I would say tests. I'm sure there's a better word, but I don't feel like coming up with it right now. It tests sort of where you're at with regard to the work that you're doing to raise your consciousness back to yourself. And I call this, descending into we descend into the ego in order to raise the vibration of it. Like coming back to what you're saying about we are energy transformers. Just to completely make it my own thing, but we come back to to lift the ego into to transform the ego into something new, and I think that this is the internal sort of.
Yeah, yes. And I just want to clarify, again, getting into the metaphor of the bicycle wheel, and the rod. The danger of the ego is that it becomes the final reference point, the final word of being human, my way, in my situation. It's like the casing saying, I am good enough unto myself. I am going to get off the frame of the transcendent. I don't need the rod. I'm just going to roll without the rod and without the framework, the meaning framework. Where does a bicycle wheel go? It falls. It's leaned against a tree and it's useless and rolling through life, you know? And in some sense, this is kind of harsh, put it this way. But someone who becomes final ego reference, they are like a bicycle wheel getting off the frame of the bike and thinking that it can just roll in its own terms. And this harkens me to, you might call, the traditional theology. And we know about Martin Luther, the great reform, okay? That in some sense ignited, in a sense, the Protestant movement. I mean, that's an oversimplification of complex history, but it's not inaccurate. And he said, what is sin? And sin means missing the mark. It's kind of like an archer, totally missing the target. Kind of like, what is this? And how often are we as human beings doing stuff that totally misses the target of what's good and what's effective, even for ourselves, much less others in the planet, and so, so in a sense, repentance, quote unquote, from sin means, hey, get back, get your archery straight, and at least hit the darn target. And maybe you'll even hit the bull's eye, kind of thing. So anyway, the wheel, the ego, is not meant to live unto itself and roll through life. It is meant to be attached to a transcendent perspective. In other words, a transcendent perspective, a transcendent sense, along with one's body sense, one's relationship sense, and my internal psychic and mental sense is all part of a unity. Yeah. And in alcoholic terminology, the 12-step terminology, we used to, in a sense, we've all known people, including myself, when people in the alcoholic mindset become very ego-centered, egotistical.
Yeah.
The term king baby and queen baby. No, why does not deliberate to me? Why am I not getting my promotion? Doggone it, I deserve it, and what's wrong with you? And you all just are weighing me down. I'm done,
Everybody took advantage of me.
It'll take advantage of me, and corporations suck, and I want to go with Musk to Mars or whatever, Can't wait till the rocket ship takes us away from this awful planet. No, it's and this is where, one of the, again, 8 principles of joy, of effective being, effective living, is humility. In other words, de-egoize yourself. Notice that your ego consciousness is important. You want to have a healthy, effective ego. You want to know when you've eaten too much. Your ego can tell them, Tune into your ego. Could be a god. But you used a key word earlier. Heart. The heart is the major organ that tunes us into transcendence. Yes, mind and guts are part of it. The whole body is part of the mind, okay? The mind is more than just the cranium and the brain. But the heart is very much the core spiritual organ. That is true in the chakra system, but other people too. And one of the terrific books, for anyone who listens and wants to read a terrific book, if you haven't already, by Gary Zukov, The Seat of the Soul. I mentioned it, I think, last time. The seat of the soul is what? The heart. And in what terms does, in his understanding, how does a heart operate? Basic intention. Basic intention. That from the heart, and what happens is, speaking of energy, out of your heart is an invisible template of intention. If your intention is to help, to assist, to make life better, funny how opportunities arise to fit your intention. It's like a template, like a circle begging for circular things, or parallelogram seeking for parallelogrammic things, et cetera, et cetera. And they come back to you. It's like the template comes back to you. It's a self-illuminating, self-feeding system. So if one of the pillars of joy is generosity, compassion, if that is out of my heart as a template, reality will feed back, the kind of constructive, positive energies that will continue to fuel and feed generosity and compassion, with capacity to do it better and better, but also with the intrinsic rewards of internal satisfaction that comes from generosity. The fact is, as neuroscientists have found, there is a neurological corpus mechanism that is wired to predispose us to generosity. That it's not true that human beings are just in nature self-centered, selfish. Yes, that can be there. But neurologically, they have found that there are brain mechanisms that automatically, if you will, are tailored toward generosity. And if in my willing self and my heartfelt self tap into that, there I have mind, body, and spirit being generous, whatever that means in the moment, And so anyway, I feel like I may be kind of adrift a bit, what's our mainstream of thought, but the word heart, again and again, it is instrumental just for people who relate to the Christian conviction and biblical thinking. Psalm 51, the penitential psalm attributed to King David, when he only helped to murder a person and steal his wife, and that kind of thing. He says in the poetic spiritual consciousness, create in me, O Creator, a clean heart, open heart, a cleansed heart, and renew a right spirit within me. Renew a right spirit within me. It sort of intimates, the transcendent connection, and it is in the heart. And David knew that. Create in me an open, a clean, a cleansed heart, O sacred, and renew a right spirit within me. Do not take your sacred spirit from me, or turn your face or back to me. It's that sense of intrinsic connection to transcendence. And that is wonderful when the ego heart self, the ego heart connection, can recognize the rod around, the transcendent rod around which one rolls through life. I hope the bicycle wheel image is clear.
Oh, it's very clear. I mean, just to put a point on it, now I'm realizing we're at the end here, and I never got you your second cup of coffee.
No, that was good.
Flavor half.
No, I realized one was enough. It's funny. I never felt like, oh no, but where's the kava? I'm not that addicted. I'm somewhat addicted to, but no. So yeah, so maybe that's a good ending point, just to underscore the centrality of the heart.
Well, I think it certainly is, and I was sort of pointing at it is that transcendence of the consciousness, which, and you mentioned last time, and the the heart and the mind are somewhat indiscernible at certain levels, at certain percent.
Right. So they're so together. They're both ends.
And certainly within the realm of consciousness, the way I'm selling it anyways is then everything falls within the realm of consciousness. But if you're attempting to lift your vibration, boy, if you're attempting to lift your consciousness, boy, a great place to start is by simply paying attention to what your heart was telling you. And if that's simply that place of, in this state, I don't feel that connection to God. Or if you're walking by the logs at the hardware store and you see the errant sort of hedonistic bum walking by in your consciousness that says, who cares if they're bark free, and it hurts your heart. Just those simple things can help you steer you in the right direction of how do you lift your vibration and how do you lift your consciousness.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
awesome. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Be here.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I regret that we had such a superficial conversation. Well, yeah, it's okay.
Right. Right. All right. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.